Hello, everybody. So today we'll get into part 2 of our Governments of the World videos, and today we'll be getting into autocracies. You might know them as monarchies, you might know them as dictatorships, because, there's a few. When we look at autocracy, the whole idea is that you do have rule by typically one person, right? And that can come in a variety of different forms. You do have absolute monarchy, which is really just one person running the show, typically ruled by decree. You have constitutional monarchies, which you do have a king or queen or sultan, but there are some rights that people have, and sometimes there's like legislatures and stuff too. And then you have dictatorships, and dictatorships are a little bit tricky, and I'll talk about those, and that's something we're going to be doing a little assignment for in class, because for many people, that can also be, it really depends on who you ask. And so I have here dictatorships, just big, bold, because, dictatorships can happen in a variety of different ways. You can have your traditional dictatorship, like, random general takes over the country and rules by decree and an iron fist, or you have a family that comes to power. Like a lot of people often will look at North Korea as the great example of a current dictatorship. But dictatorships can also be sneaky. You can have ways in which a ruler or an elected official can slowly but surely get different laws passed that put them into a position of a dictator, where technically they're elected, but the powers they have are much stronger than that. Of course, you can look to the rise of power of guys like Hitler or Stalin that kind of follow that mold, and maybe some people even today. And that's something that we're going to end up doing an assignment on. But when you look at dictators, it doesn't just have to be this one guy takes power and passes it down to a son or maybe a queen or something like that. It can happen within government structures. Okay, I talked about the Roman Empire as the beginning of like your major republics of the world, but then they get co-opted first by Julius Caesar, and then of course eventually by Augustus Caesar, who technically never held an official position of emperor, but had all the power. So there's a way that these dictatorships can form, and I'm going to have you look at some different stuff, because there's some different places around the world today that you can really see that dictatorial type of stuff happening, but it's happening within a different government structure. Okay? All right. Now, so absolute monarchies. Where do we have places in which you have a straight up king, ruler, monarch that is in charge? And I have 4 great examples here with their leaders. So going from left to right, you have Brunei, where you have Sultan Hassan al-Bolkiah. Eswatini with King Mswati III. Eswatini was renamed recently. That you used to know that as Swaziland. Sultan Haitham bin Tariq of Oman. And then on the right, Saudi Arabia, King Salman bin Abdulaziz. So what you have here is these are ruling kings, okay? Or sultans. They will pass power down to an heir of their choosing, typically a son or something like that. And you can see here, they'll depend on the situation. On the left, you see Sultan Hassanal in more military garb for that type of, for probably some type of function. King Mswati from Eswatini there is speaking at the United Nations. So you see he's in your kind of classic suit and tie. And it really depends on where you're at. But they are in charge. They do have advisors. They do have different aspects of the government. And in some places, you could argue that in Saudi Arabia, they are also a theocracy, being that much of their law code is derived from the Quran, and religion does determine much of their laws. So they have a king, but also a little bit of theocracy mixed in there. And so again, these are kings. They rule in that way still today. Now, in some other areas, you have constitutional monarchies. And you have different waves of that when we talk about autocracy. So let's talk about Bhutan. So the head of the state in Bhutan is King Jigme Khesar Namgyal Wangchuk Druk Gyalpo. He is a king. And his title is, by the way, Druk Gyalpo. He is the Dragon King, which is just incredible. In the language, the Dzongkha language in Bhutan, Drukgyal means dragon. And Bhutan itself is land of the Thunder Dragon, which is just, I mean, come on, how awesome is that? On the right there, they're also primarily a Buddhist nation, and that is the famous Tiger Nest monastery. They used to be a strict monarchy, but under their current king, he made the decision to change it to a constitutional monarchy. So what do we have here? So the head of state is a king, and he will pass on that power, that executive power, to his heirs. Okay. Now he's a young guy though; he's in his 30s. But what do they have? They have universal suffrage. They have a two-house legislature that makes and passes laws. They have a court system. They have a prime minister who is a head of the government. So the prime minister is in charge of the legislature. There is a cabinet that advises the king. And so you have, the king does have final say on things, but there are laws, there's advising, and so there is a constitutional monarchy is basically a monarchy that has a little bit of a division of power. Really, the place where you saw that be created back in the day was in England. And so this is something that's very much like that today. And in Bhutan, you really see the king sharing power with the legislature. It's more of a partnership. Now, another type of this constitutional monarchy is Jordan. So Jordan, you have King Abdullah II. That's him on the left. On the right, of course, is the famous rock city of Petra. So going to go there one day. Now, he has decidedly more power. Okay, so he is the head of state. Okay, so like what are things that he does? So he does things like he makes treaties. He's the commander-in-chief of the army. He can actually call and postpone elections. If he feels that the legislature is not doing a good enough job, he can dismiss the government and dissolve parliament. There is a two-house legislature, but he appoints the Senate. And it's pretty. Now he can't create legislation. That's what the legislature can do, but they can't override his veto like in the United States of America. So the legislature still has the power of creating legislation, as I have down there in the veto override, but he still runs the show. However, women can vote in Jordan. And they also have the ability to be in parliament. We're going to talk a lot about women's rights throughout this year. And so here you have, this is a constitutional government, but one in which the king has way more power, that the legislature is there. There is some voting. Women do have equal rights, but it's not quite what you saw in Bhutan. And then we have the final thing that I'll get into here, because it does fall a little bit into autocracy, is a theocracy. Okay, and here we have the power of religion. The two greatest examples of that, of course, are Saudi Arabia and Vatican City. Vatican City, of course, is run by the Pope. Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned before, run by the king, but the king does adhere to religious principles, and there are penalties for breaking religious laws, not just civil laws as well. And that's the thing that's a little bit different about a theocracy. In most republics where you can have like freedom of religion, you can do this or that, if you break a quote-unquote religious law, that's something that you have to deal with your family or your local religious community. But it's not going to get you like thrown in jail or anything like that. Like, in areas like Saudi Arabia, you can serve jail time, or in Vatican City, if you break religious laws, like one of the priests can be removed from, or they can be excommunicated. So it's a much different setup than most people are used to. And what comes out of this theocracy is a very interesting area called the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now we do a whole little mini unit on Iran, but so Iran's very interesting because in Iran, what do you have? You do have voting. Okay, so you are able to vote for a legislature, and a prime minister is in charge of the legislature and typically is the one that runs kind of the day-to-day of the country. They are actually involved in international affairs and stuff like that. And so you see kind of, a little bit of a republic, but rules and regulations are often determined by various committees that are made up of clerics and other religious figures, which I'll get into again when we talk about that. And sitting above all of them is the Ayatollah. So the current Ayatollah is the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He has final say. He is considered to be the religious authority and the overall supreme leader of Iran. So the prime minister runs a legislature, he passes laws, he enforces laws, but if the Ayatollah says, hey, we're doing this, that's the final straw. The Ayatollah runs most of the military. The Ayatollah will determine if, and his councils will determine if laws actually line up with the Quran, and if they do not, those laws will be stricken. And it makes for a very unique place in the world. So that's why I have it kind of part of this as part of the autocracy, because yes, you do have a little bit of republicanism that you are voting and there's prime ministers and people do serve in parliament and men and women can vote. So you have that kind of stuff going on. But over top of it, you have an autocrat leader that makes final decisions on anything and everything, and his rule cannot be superseded at all. Like I said, in my classes, I'm going to be getting much more into this much more deeply. But again, so most people think that, most everybody's a republic and stuff like that. And sure, republics are the most common form of government, but republics can be corrupted and you can have these dictatorships within republics. And then we also have functioning monarchies that have been going on for hundreds of years and have stayed monarchies despite the fact that most places are republics, that these monarchies have held on. And so we need to understand just these different styles of government and how they're structured, and then that will allow us to understand how nations often deal with each other in international affairs as well. All right, guys, so hopefully this gives you, again, this is broad-based ideas, gave you a couple examples in there, and we'll get into more stuff in class, okay? So thanks for watching, guys. Take care.